Okay, so we're going to talk about dialogic learning, dialogic teaching, and dialogic practice. Dialogic learning is egalitarian dialogue in which different people provide arguments based on validity claims and not on power claims. The concept of dialogic learning isn't new. For example, we have the Socratic dialogues, and it can occur in any educational situation and contains an important potential for social transformation. Dialogic practice is primary interactive talk or dialogue, and it's also a strategy to develop thinking creativity that is inclusive and participatory. Dialogic education means teaching for dialogue as well as teaching through dialogue. This sounds simple and is simple, but it implies a profound change in how we understand education. For example, establishing egalitarian relationships. Key indicators of dialogic practice are a willingness to ask for help and understanding, an openness to change of opinion in the face of arguments, and individuals being able to admit that have been wrong and someone else has been right. Here are a few key terms. We have exploratory talk, words like because, if, why, maybe, perhaps. We have disputational talk. Here the egotism of each individual is trying to impose their position. A narrow and defended self-image is maintained, where the self is defined as against the other groupthink. Here individuals uncritically agreeing with each other in order to avoid any disruption to group harmony. Cumulative talk. Here the group identify with the group ethos more than their own individual identity. Consequently, there's no incentive to challenge ideas or explore reasoning, and instead people seek to agree with each other to maintain the feelings of belonging to that group. Dialogic is about holding different perspectives together in tension. This tension leads to the challenge of and competition between ideas, which we call critical thinking, as well to the spontaneous generation of new ideas and insights, which we call creative thinking. So in dialogic teaching, there are several things that have to be done. Questions are carefully framed to encourage reflection and good answers. Answers are not endpoints, but stimulus for further questions in a long chain of dialogue. The teacher's role is to weave contributions into a coherent whole, leading participants to find meaning and helping them through to link to further questions. So the Russian philosopher Mikhail Bakhtin, he's around from 1875 to 1975, he's cited as a source of the use of the term dialogic. And he made a big contrast between dialogue and conversation. Dialogue, for Bakhtin, is shared inquiry, in which answers give rise to further questions, forming a continuous chain of questions and answers. Dia, comes from a Greek word meaning through or across, and logic from Greek word meaning which is used to refer to reasons. So dialogic literally means reasons across difference. Bakhtin pointed out that what we've been calling logic and mistaking for reason was just monologic. Bakhtin's account of the impact of what he called the persuasive word has obvious significance for teaching. So I'm just going to read a quote. Such a word awakens new and independent words, organizes masses of our words from within, and does not remain in an isolated and static condition. It is not finite but open. In each of the new contents that dialogize it, this discourse is able to reveal ever new ways to mean. Thinking skills. The skill of being able to suspend all worry about identity, all concern about who I am, who you are, and what group we belong to. To summarize, dialogic is open and responsiveness to others, to new ideas that are more comparative, critical, and challenging. Basically, living in a creative space of dialogue where there has always been many voices and where there is never any certainty. In recent times, the concept of dialogic learning was linked to contributions from various perspectives and disciplines such as the theory of dialogic action, Freire, 1970, dialogic inquiry approach, Wells, 1999, the theory of communicative action, Habermas, 1984, the dialogue of dialogic imagination, Boltkin, 1981, and the dialogical self, Solar, 2004. At this point, it is important to mention learning communities, an educational project which seeks social and cultural transformation of all educational centres and their surroundings through dialogic learning, emphasising egalitarian dialogue amongst community members, and this includes teaching staff, students, families, entities and volunteers. In learning communities, it is fundamental to have the involvement and participation of all members of the community because, as research shows, learning depends on the coordination amongst all the interactions and activities that take place in different spheres of the learner's lives. For example, you've got school, home, workplace, and the interactions and activities and spaces of formal learning, such as classrooms. Along these lines, the Learning Communities project aims at multiple learning contacts and interactions with the objective of all students reaching higher levels of development. And that's Vygotsky, 1978. So let's just go into the truth theories and the who wrote them and how they contradict or support each other. So we have Wells' dialogic inquiry. Gordon Wells in 1999 defines inquiry not as a method but as a predisposition for questioning, trying to understand situations, collaborating with others with the objective of finding answers. Dialogic inquiry is an educational approach that acknowledges the dialectical relationship between the individual and society. For example, acquiring knowledge through communicative interactions. Well points out that predisposition for dialogic inquiry depends on the characteristics of the learning environments, and that's why it's important to recognise them into context for collaborative action and interaction. According to Wells, dialogic inquiry not only enriches individuals' knowledge but transforms it, ensuring the survival of different cultures and their capacity to transform themselves according to the requirements of every social moment. Freire, the theory of dialogic action. 1970, Paulo Freire states that human nature is naturally dialogic, and he believes that communication has a pivotal role in our life. We're continuously in dialogue with others, and it is this process that we create and recreate ourselves. According to Freire, dialogue is the choice of democratic educators. Educators, in order to promote free and critical learning, should create the conditions for dialogue that encourages the curiosity of the learner. The goal of dialogic action is always to reveal the truth by interacting with others in the world. In his dialogic action theory, Freire distinguishes between dialogical actions, the ones that promote understanding, cultural creation and liberation, and non-dialogic actions which deny dialogue, distort communication, and reproduce power. Habermas, the theory of communicative action. Rationality for Habermas in 1984 has less to do with knowledge and its acquisition than the use of knowledge that individuals who are capable of speech and action make. In his instrumental rationality, social agents make an instrumental use of knowledge. They propose certain goals and aim to achieve them in an objective world. On the contrary, cumulative rationality, knowledge is the understanding provided by the objective world as well as by the subjectivity of the context where the action develops. So, if cumulative rationality means understanding, then the conditions that make reaching consensus possible have to be studied. This links us to the concepts of arguments and argumentation. While arguments are conclusions that consist of validity claims as well as reasons by which can be questioned, argumentation is the kind of speech in which participants give arguments to develop and turn down the validity claims that have become questionable. At this point, Habermas' differentiation between validity claims and power claims is important because we may have something that we say be considered good or valid by imposing it by means of force, or being ready to enter a dialogue in the other people's arguments may lead us to rectify our initial stances. In the first case, the communicator holds power claims, while in the second case, validity claims are held, while in power claims the argument is forceful and is applied. In validity claims, the force of the argument prevails. Validity claims are the basis of dialogic learning. Bolton, dialogic imagination. As mentioned before, Bolton, 1981, he believes that the individual does not exist outside of dialogue, and the concept of self establishes itself in the other person. In fact, through dialogue, it's only through dialogue that the other cannot be silenced or excluded. Bolton states that every time that we talk about something that we have read about, seen, or felt, we're actually reflecting the dialogues we have had with others, showing the meanings that we have created in previous dialogues. What is said cannot be separated from the perspective of others. The individual speech and the collective are deeply related and entwined. And it is in this sense that Bolton talks about chains of dialogues, to the point that every dialogue results from a previous one, and at the same time every new dialogue is going to present future ones. So lastly, we just come to the career, dialogic interactions and interactions of power. In their debate with John Searle, the Centre of Research in Theories and Practice that Overcome Inequalities, CREA, C-R-E-A from now on, made two critiques of Habermas. CREA's work on communicative acts points out that on one hand, the key concept to interaction and not claim, and on the other hand, relationships can be identified power interactions and dialogic interactions, i.e., a manager can hold validity claims while inviting his employee to have coffee with him. The employee could have accepted because of the power claims that arises because of the unequal structure of the company and the society, which places her subordinate to the position of the employer. So did she go for the coffee based on validity claims, or did she go because she felt compelled to because of the power structures around her? So CREA defines power relations as those in which the power interactions involved predominate over dialogic interactions, and dialogic relations are those in which dialogic interactions are prevalent over power interactions. So dialogic interactions are based on equality and seek understanding through speakers appreciating the provided arguments to the dialogue, regardless of the position of power of the speaker. So their educational projects have contributed to transform some of the power interactions into dialogic interactions and show one learns much more through dialogic interactions. There is a lot more movement of ideas and content and contacts, change. An example of dialogic practice is Irit Rogoff, and she wrote in Terra Firma, Geography's Visual Culture 2000. In this she explains, this is a quote, "Art is my interlocutor rather than my object of study. It is the entity that chases me around and forces me to think differently, and at a different register through the permissions provided by another angle." So this takes me on to the activity. So your subject area is increasing sexual reproductive healthcare awareness and uptake in girls between the age of 11 and 25 in Central Africa. So how would you do this with dialogic practice? So we start off, we'll be using an archetype, which, as Rogoff talks about, art being her way of communicating through art. My way would be communicating through archetypes. So for example, I'm going to start with an equilateral triangle and use this as a interlocutor between the content of sexual reproductive health, the archetype, the triangle, and the dialogic practice that emerges from this and the potential for change. So show your students an image of an equilateral triangle as a geometric symbolic archetype and rotate it so it has no plane of preference. Now, compose 5 questions that you would ask within dialogic discussion that have the potential to lead to knowledge transfer about sexual reproductive health. So if you do 5 questions, I'll start with first one to get going. So number one, I would say, starting with a triangle, how could we cross-reference this shape with our own bodies? Can you see any parallels? So just to summarize, for me, from what I've learned from this, dialogic practice is mostly intuitive. To me, it seems quite common sense, and it's something that most often we do unconsciously, just through listening, being sensitive, and having empathy. And for me, the key activity in dialogic practice is to disengage the ego and to unlock and be open to change processes. Okay, thank you.